What the Heck's, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 upgrades that were never really there. I'm your host, Davy. With me, my co-host, Phil, who I hope is really there.
I might be. I might not be. No, I'm doing good. Right. Excited to talk about these illusions.
Yeah. As you could conclude from this, we've got a focus on the Illusory Might Rivals deck. And specifically, we're going to try and look at it from the perspective of using it as a Rivals deck rather than chopping it up into championship play. And we'll talk more about the reasons for that when we get back to it. But in the meantime, for context, we're recording this the last weekend in January, closing in on Adepticon. LVO is going on right now. Unfortunately, it sounds like things really fell through for some events there. So there are only a small handful of players in the Underworlds events there. Maybe we'll get some more insight onto why exactly that happened down the line. So, but we got a few community shout outs here. Phil, you got anything that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, in a pretty similar topic to what we're discussing today, on the Set the Tempo blog, Compact wrote an article about Godsworn gamers. I guess it's called Warlords format, where he brought the Dread Pageant to a Warlords event using the Illusory Might as part of that.
Yeah, for those who don't know, that Warlords thing is you can bring just a straight Rivals deck, or you can bring your rivals, your faction rivals, and supplement with something else. And that something else can be, I think, Essentials or either the universal Rivals decks.
Yeah, so which is an interesting thing to have. It sounds like that it was a fairly well attended event, and it sounds like it was fun. So maybe that format will catch on. I don't know.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's interesting to see that there was a lot of success had by grabbing up a bunch of the illusion stuff and taking advantage of some of the powerful synergies there with the Dread Pageant. So
yeah,
good read and a timely topic.
Yeah. There are almost too many blogs to detail, so I'm gonna do kind of a sideways recommendation and say that you should take a look on the Discords. There's usually a content sub channel. Is that what they call them on there?
Yes.
Where as content creators create something, and they'll post up there. So it's a nice way if you haven't looked at that in a while, you can kind of scroll through there and see who all is doing different things. I think Underdog Certainty of Death from Mandarga's going. There's a new one called Monkey's Hex and all kinds of things. So also continuing, since we're talking Rivals, it's worth mentioning Battle Mallet. I'm about halfway through their second episode that talks about Rivals decks, kind of gives a close look at them, working through the Dire Chasm warbands now. It's a good listen. And then finally, I just wanted to say an adios to Jonathan Davis. For those who don't know, he's one of the co-hosts of Path to Glory, and he's taken a step back for some other family priorities and other just his own reasons and whatever. But I just wanted to basically say thanks for all the content he's created over the years for this game, be it on his blog when he had that resource for everything. Basically, for a while, it was really hard to figure out what was out there for Underworlds related content, and you could just go to his blog and go chase it down. So best of luck to him moving forward. And then Jason Murray, actually from Battle Mallet, is picking up his seat in the meantime. So he and Amon will continue Path to Glory. And that is that. Phil, what the heck is going on with you?
Well, we played some fun Rivals matches recently. I have started trying to figure out what the heck I want to do with black powder.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Most of our matches have not gone particularly well. I have been playing his rivals deck though, just to try and get a feel for the mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that rivals deck is rough, man. I tell you what.
Yeah.
If you're planning to play rivals, don't play with them uh, unless you don't care about winning. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of an interesting, like, as far as new releases go, it's probably fallen somewhere like right in the middle of the power sort of curve at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably a good place to be. But at the same time, it feels kind of rough trying to get him up and running.
Mm.
Uh, so I don't know. I'll have to try him out in champions, but as of right now, feeling like it might be a bit of a slog to get this figured out.
All right. Um, well, myself, obviously, I was in on those games. I also am trying to sort out what I need to. There's not all that much time before Adepticon, so need to
That's
start
true.
practicing something, picking what it'll be, and um, at the same time, trying to pick something that our local group can kind of hone each other against.
Mm-hmm.
Play something. So I think we noted that a lot of the guys here haven't played much against crushes, and it's definitely something you need to be prepped for. So
Yeah.
we may do an episode on something like that of figuring out we've done this in the past where figuring out
Mm-hmm.
what you want to practice against and that sort of thing. But um, yeah, I so have played more rivals recently than I have in a while, and I also had played, a little while back, played some Blade Coven rivals. I, I really kind of like the format, and I like it for, like you said, like you kind of, as rough as that deck is, I think if you start out playing with the rivals deck, you kind of force yourself to work through some of the cards and think a little bit more about them than you might otherwise do if you were to just dismiss it immediately. So I think it's kind of a neat way to break in a new warband, or familiarize with a new warband. So, or a new universal rivals deck. So,
Yeah.
um, so let's do that. We'll be talking about them. So if you want a breakdown of how the cards apply in championship play, there's plenty of blogs out there. Path to Glory's done an episode. There's plenty of content where you can kind of look through that. We're gonna go through it from the experience of like, hey, this is one of only two illusion, one of only two rivals decks that are universal, and so who would use this deck is basically the question we kind of set out to explore a little bit, and then in the same way that I was talking about, where you break in a new warband by using the deck, you kind of it sparked some ideas for me about, okay, like maybe in championship play, like this card is better or worse or different than I thought here. So
Mm-hmm.
um, we'll also be mentioning some lessons learned from there. So um, let's start it off. Can you break the deck down for us?
Yeah. So at least just from a general construction standpoint, it's a lot closer to what you'd sort of expect from. So I guess the contrast is that we've been seeing a lot of the rivals decks from in-faction rival decks recently not having the even balance of six surges
Mm,
and six ends phase, which was a little bit of a surprise when we started to see it, but it now looks like that's going to be sort of the pattern.
mm,
Um, for Illusory Might, we do have a even mix. We have six surges, five end phase, one third end phase. So for an overall 6 to 6 balance there. And then for the power cards, it's obviously got 10 ploys, but then you also have in the upgrades, not surprisingly, many illusions. Seven of
yeah,
the upgrades are illusion upgrades, and then three of them are just your regular old pay a glory to equip them type upgrades.
yeah. So it was interesting playing this thing because whoever was playing the illusion deck would get to the end of the game and like almost all their glory is unspent.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and
you hardly spend anything.
sometimes the one or two that was spent was just like, I guess I'll do something with this. So
Yeah, it's like I don't know. I've got all this glory. I'll throw on something because I
yeah,
might as well.
um, and it changes some. I mean, not a lot about how you play, but it's weird to think about. You talked about this split of surge and end phase. What we talk about how the objectives kind of lay things out for you, like what your general game plan is if you're playing this as a deck. What did you find? Like what is it pushing you to do in general?
Yeah, so I found when I was looking at the deck to try and figure out like what is this? What do I feel like this deck is trying to do? Um, and the objectives: horrors in the dark, lengthening shadows, and out of time all sort of started to push me in this direction of thinking, okay, the deck wants you to be going into enemy territory and in some way caring about either feature tokens or objectives.
Hmm.
And in a lot of cases, it actually doesn't really care which one. Um, so, like, for instance, Horrors in the Dark is one of the surges here. You score it immediately after an activation. If you have two or more friendly fighters that are in cover hexes that are not in your territory, so there's the push in enemy territory thing. But then you can also score it if it's two or more friendly fighters holding objectives that are not in your territory. So they're sort of just saying be standing on hexes, featured
Yeah,
hexes in some way.
yeah,
Uh, it just has to be that they're both cover or both objectives. So we don't really
right,
care which.
right. And interestingly, cover is going to include any printed cover
True.
on there. So
Not very many of those yet, but they are an
no,
option.
yeah. But yeah, so there are there's that surge. Trace the ley lines is a thing that cares about a particular objective number.
Yep.
Um, that was a thing I noticed. There's a couple spots where you're trying to pay attention to what objective number is what, and I actually enjoy that pretty well. It creates a mini game. It's kind of a lot of work for some of the One Glory thing, but I think the other thing we discovered in Rivals, One Glory goes is a lot bigger deal than it is in Championship, right?
Yeah. I don't think we broke double digits
No,
in
no,
any of our games. So
yeah,
yeah, one glory is significant. It was usually
yeah,
the thing that turned the tide.
yeah. I think we had like a 9-9 with a tiebreaker, 9-7, and then I think the closest to a blowout we had was like maybe 9-6 or something. So,
Yeah. Right.
um, but these are sort of the objectives. We were talking about this after one of the games where I was like, it seems like ways that it can get you some early glory, like this deck, especially with things like Horrors in the Dark, um, and then some of these other ones. There's Illusory Nemesis, where if your opponent plays an illusion, you get a glory, or when you play your third illusion in the round, which, like you said, there's 7 of them, and then there's also cards that will go dig for them. Uh,
Hmm.
that's a way to get passive glory. And so I was like, yeah, this is not bad. You can get some of that seed glory. And I thought about it a little bit longer. I'm like, except you don't need seed glory in this deck. It's so weird, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. You can kind of you're really just playing to score it. Period. Like you just
yeah,
don't really care when
yeah,
you pick up the glory.
right. Because the only 3 upgrades that you actually have to pay for is Weapons Master, which is basically great strength if you have a total of 3 upgrades, including that one on. Ephemeral Fortitude, which is this fighter has 4 wounds, a wounds characteristic of 4 in rounds 1 and 2, and goes down to 2. And the other one was Shadow Mover. Um,
Yeah.
so some of those are situationally good. Some of them you know I don't know. They not always a whole lot of urgency to get some of those on. Something like Shadow Mover though, getting some extra move on early can be pretty nifty.
Yeah. I
Especially if you get
mean,
that on +1 upgrade. I mean +1 illusion. All of a sudden somebody's at +2 speed, and you can close the distance in a way that would be
yeah.
unexpected. So
I mean, it's a bigger deal than you'd think, but you're not scrambling for plus move usually. Although
Yeah.
maybe you are. I mean, if you're playing Crushes or something.
Mm.
But yeah, and I think that, well, it's a pretty well balanced objective deck, right? I mean, like, yes, there's some stuff in here that's a little difficult to achieve, but nothing like that feels entirely impossible. Like, it's
Yeah.
not out of the realm of possibility for, like, I don't know, if you really work at it, most of these are doable. I think the ones that hurt the most and sort of push you towards having to do specific things, and like this sort of will lead us towards our why these warbands discussions, but like Illusory Titan is one that I think is actually pretty difficult. It's a kill, a score immediately for a kill, but you have to have 2 illusion upgrades on the fighter who makes the kill. You get
Mm.
one glory for that. Uh, so there's sort of this focus on having illusions, but it's usually like more than one, which is frustrating because, with the way the power deck is structured, you don't really have a way to draw cards. So if you
Sure.
just don't have enough of them, you just can't do stuff, which I think is one of the more frustrating things that I found in trying to actually run some of these.
Yeah. Yeah. The deck itself, it was a little surprising. When I was opening it up for the first time, I was like, okay, there's going to be 12 objectives in here, and 10 of them are going to say illusion somewhere in their text. Have something to do with that,
Yeah.
and uh, ends up not being the case. There's maybe 4, and then there's a couple others
Yeah.
that kind of tie in. There's where a certain number of upgrades or something like that, um, but I think that's good. It would be a little too one note if it was all on the one
Yeah.
thing. So I think the only other things I wanted to say in general about the objectives in particular was it's interesting how some cards that look like they might be stronger in championship, or that you'd like, I'd think about this in championship and rivals, are less so. I think we noticed there was a false apotheosis. So this is a surge that scores you 2 glory after a friendly fighter's attack action takes an enemy fighter with 3 or more upgrades out of action. Uh, like we said, our glory counts were pretty low, and so it's kind of this thing where because they're not tuned up, not only are they not going to be like I'm not going to score this early unless you're, I don't know, unless things are going really weird. Uh, but you may not have a valid target at all. Like I don't think none of us, neither
Never
of us
came up.
ever scored this one. Yeah, and I know in the match where you were using this deck, I don't think I ever put 3 upgrades on a single person. I spread around, not out of intentional counterplay, but uh, just because I didn't have that much glory to spare, or
Yeah.
just didn't draw into the upgrades as well. So
Yeah.
um,
I think there's also just few upgrades that you would really care to stack all on one fighter in a lot of the rivals decks.
mm,
So it's like, oh, you don't have just generic stuff like great strength, great fortitude that you're just gonna be like, okay, best fighter is just gonna keep stacking it up. It's like, no, well, somebody who needs a weapon is gonna get this weapon, and then somebody who needs a defense bonus gets this defense bonus, and it's like you're trying to spread everything out because it doesn't make sense to stack it all on one fighter.
mm, yeah. Well, so in general, the power deck, we already talked about a bunch of illusions. There's several weapons in there. There's some defensive tech, like put you on guard, get you
Yeah.
shields, that sort of thing. So there's between that and then there's some push tech in the gambits. We are thinking this is a push into enemy territory and fight them with the way to maybe pick up if they're choosing not to engage. There's some ways to get some glory on the way if you need to. Um, and so that kind of informs some of our thinking about what factions. So what came to mind for you for the factions?
So I initially thought of factions that could uh, revive fighters because I thought that it'd be easier to have them like in enemy territory if you didn't care about them dying.
Mm,
But I then I didn't actually play with any of them because I sort of realized after playing against your warbands that you had chosen that I was like,
Yeah.
no, that's not actually going to work very well. You'll lose a bunch of your illusions, probably won't get enough use out of them. You'll bleed a bunch of glory from having all these small fighters that can't like get much bonus.
Hmm.
Um, and like being in enemy territory, you don't you don't want to have to be spending so much time reviving your fighters just to score the like, hey, I've got fighters standing in enemy territory things. Which ultimately led me to think that you want tougher warbands that are aggressive. And I thought that Magors actually fit the bill pretty well. They're all 4 wounds. They are all pretty good at hitting people. They have a minimum accuracy of 2 smash, which is never bad. And then
Yeah.
because this deck cares about standing on either cover hexes or objectives, having the ability to not be driven back is actually a really big deal.
Yeah.
Um, and so I felt like Gartok really helps you there, and having the Gore Fists in general as a way to swing back is not going to be bad. It never actually came up.
Mm.
You never missed either of them, but
Well,
uh,
I missed. There might have been a miss or two, but I did
the
try to make
range
some
two
attacks
and
from
stuff.
range too. Yeah, like you've punished me enough with those gore fists.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I sort of ended up feeling like, yeah, being bigger, being sturdier probably matters a little more than having the ability to always be in enemy territory. And I think that played pretty well
Mm.
in general.
Yeah.
Um, what were your thoughts about warbands to choose?
Well, one that I kind of came to uh, vaguely, didn't really think all that strongly about it, but then listener Console Jagel, uh, he or she gave a heads up of like, hey, what do you think about spoilers with these? And I was like, yeah, I kind of thought about that, and then the basically thought about it harder there, and it makes sense. Like they have varied wound profiles, which help with the things that want you to have a number of upgrades equal to your wounds, um, or hold the right objective, or that sort of thing. They've got guys who would absolutely love to have a better weapon than they are currently toting around. So that's handy. And they have, especially with Korsh, they have a way to get into enemy territory. So with relatively low risk. So that was kind of cool. And so tried them out, and then kind of similar with your thoughts on Magora, I thought maybe Wormspad, who have good stat lines in general. Like they're big, chunky people, um, but especially for them because their rivals deck is not so great.
Yeah.
They're they're kind of on the hunt for something else, and so if nothing else, I thought it'd be worth checking it out with them. And I think there's some individual cards that actually play pretty well to them as well. So um, that's kind of where we landed on that. What did you think about? Did you find any um, interactions that were particularly cool with you guys, or what after experiencing with Magors, what did you have any thoughts, or any of the ones that you're playing against? I guess.
So I'll start by just saying that with Magors, it really felt like they they could do pretty much everything that the deck needed them to do. There was never trouble trying to like stand on objectives. There was never any trouble with trying to hit enemy fighters.
Hmm.
They really could do the range of what the deck is asking you to do, which felt really good. In terms of how it actually played out, though, the timing was always just slightly off. So it was
Mm.
like, so one of these in particular is like Shadow Match. It says, you score this in an end phase if you have a friendly fighter that's holding an objective with a number equal to their wounds characteristic, or they have a number of upgrades equal to their wounds characteristic. So, I mean, this one pretty much meant I needed to be holding the objective that was 4, which was very
Yeah.
doable until you like went and stood on it, and then I was like, well, that's rude. um, So yeah, I mean, like there's some timing things to figure out, but that all felt good. In terms of like combos and stuff, I felt like having um so like Blood Rack Mask felt,
Hmm.
I don't think against because you were playing with Dread Pageant when I played Magors,
Hmm.
and so in a lot of cases you didn't need to or want to be standing next to me
Yeah, yeah.
because the blender is not fun. But Blood Rack Mask felt really great on either Zarkus or Gartok because it's like,
Mm,
well, if you even want to attempt to attack me,
yeah,
you're always at risk of getting gore fisted, and then you know, here, let's just add one more free point of damage on as you approach these guys,
right.
which felt pretty great. Um, I think both of the defensive bonuses are pretty good for them. And I actually think both of these defensive illusions feel really strong in general. So, Illusory Form, you are just put on guard.
Hmm.
It's just strong.
Hmm.
And then Phantom Shield, which gives you two block defense characteristics. So,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it might as well just read +1 defense for these guys for the most
yeah.
part. I mean,
Right.
you could put on Riptooth, I guess, but I don't. He inspires two dodge, so I think he's usually better off without it. Um, and obviously, with two block, Zarkus and Gartok have a much better chance of being able to use their Gorefist as well. So,
Hmm.
some fun stuff there. Shadow Mover, which I guess we didn't really run it down. The way it works is that it's base +1 move when you have one upgrade, and obviously the upgrade itself will count. So you base just get +1. But then
Hmm.
if you have 2 to 4 upgrades, you get +2 move. And if you happen to have 5 or more upgrades on your fighter, they do get +3 move. I think usually you're just hitting this at the +2. You get that 2 upgrade sweet spot, and +2 move on anybody in the Magor Warband is feeling pretty good because these fighters are all pretty deadly, and being able to shoot across the board 5 or 6 hexes was always nice to be able to have that ability to threaten.
Yeah.
Um,
And I remember when you talked about thinking about using Magors, my first thought was like, "Ah, I don't know if they need because my brain keeps on going back to these weapons. I'm like, they attack okay anyway. But then thinking about it, I'm like, actually, it makes a lot of sense because you have Phantom Darts, which is a range 3 attack, and Phantom Spear, which is a range 2 attack.
yep.
Um, that lets them quite possibly get an attack around earlier than they would have otherwise, which if they land that, then they inspire. Uh, and then that sets them up for better situation for later. And then Phantom Fist is really accurate. Gartok and Zarkus get up to that 3 smash, but they don't start there.
Yeah.
Um, and you can set somebody else. So you can come in and pummel them, stagger them, and then let somebody else come finish the job. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's sort of the nice, like, on top of the fact that all these weapons give you something that the fighters don't have to begin with, they also all have either, you know, like we said, fists have stagger, so you
mhm.
can add some extra accuracy or damage. Uh, Phantom Spear has cleave, so if you want cleave or if you know you need it, you've got that as an option to give
Mhm.
to your non-cleave fighters. And then the darts, they have Grievous and Seeking, which it says on the card is +1 dice if the target is in cover,
Yeah,
uh, which actually is pretty great because then you're on 4 Fury at
yeah,
range 3
yeah,
with Grievous. So
yeah. The extra dice paired with Grievous is a pretty big deal.
yeah,
So,
that punishes people for standing in cover hexes pretty well.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, like you said, they don't necessarily need them, but it gives them a toolbox of like extra options. Um, and I also something we discussed while we were playing is that all of these illusion upgrades are essentially just ploys.
yeah,
There's very little difference. I mean, they're like persisting ploys that then have a pretty easy way to remove them as long as you have some sort of way to choose them with a power card. But there's not actually that many
yeah,
choose ploys anymore that would target an enemy fighter. You
yeah,
like kind of have to dig for them if you want them to
yeah.
be there.
I think I undervalued when I first saw them and when I was first thinking about illusions. I undervalued how handy it is to have an illusion weapon upgrade, because it means that, so a lot of times you're trying to protect a particular piece, like I want Septimus to be good late into the game, or so if you're playing despoilers, then someone like Draknar, you kind of want to have him around later, but there's always this tension when you're playing with that deck where you're like, I want to be able to have him land some knockout blows later, but I also kind of need to get some glory to get things going. And often he's a good candidate for that because he can use a ritual, reroll, lay that 3 damage in. If all of a sudden you can use your little guys, send Gnarl forward with Phantom Fists, pick up something early, uh, you you can do that because you don't have to get the glory before you make him useful.
Yeah.
Um, and the flip of it is, with these range things like that was a problem for your Magors guys, is that in those later rounds when you're down to 1 or 2 fighters, if you're still just range 1, unless you're getting some push tricks or doing really well with positioning, you're probably only getting the 1 attack off. Well, put these on and all of a sudden you're good for several, which
Mm-hmm.
which is all to say that after playing several games with and against this deck, I am a lot more positive on these illusionary weapons than I was
Yeah.
before. So
Yeah. I'm definitely gonna be giving them a much stronger look now for championship formats. Like there are going to be times where instead of taking like a +1 accuracy upgrade or a ploy, might just throw in the upgrade. Now, this is something we had discussed, and I don't know. I need to look at the rules again. So how does? Because I know deck construction doesn't limit your upgrades. You just have to have an equal or more amount from gambits.
right,
Can you take fewer than 10 gambits and then take extra upgrades in those gambit slots
sure can,
effectively?
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so that feels. I mean, that was having that revelation of being like, well, actually, these illusions are pretty decent, and it really made me think like, how far could you or would you even want to take this? Like, would you do 8 gambits and 12 upgrades with 2 or 3 of them being illusions if they're good? Um, or yeah, but even if you do it the other way, like there's that option. There's the I've got 10. Still go with 10 gambits, but like 3 illusion upgrades. Then you're kind of like a 13-7 split for gambits.
Yeah.
Um, that feels like you can really get turbocharged early with that, right? Like you
Yeah.
can
I
play
think
out a lot of stuff. So
there would be decks that it's like, hey, I don't really care about upgrades. My fighter is good enough, by themselves. I just need to have that burst, that one time, like, haha, surprise, I get, bonus accuracy, bonus damage, and
mm,
bonus move all off of these ploys, and now I'm going to come and get you.
yeah. Um, and in that conversation where we were talking about it, like if you did do something like, let's go something relatively conservative, like 8 gambits, uh, 12 upgrades, but of those upgrades, 3 of them are illusions or something, then you're still playing at a speed and tempo that is actually better than it used to be, because you have your sort of 11 pseudo gambits, but you have 12 upgrades, and then you can put silver lining in. Like you're much more likely to draw into a 4 upgrade hand, right?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty nice passive score in there. So it's interesting to see how much this mechanic gets in there. But I think the ability to score something like silver lining, which your opponent really can't mess with, is pretty powerful. It's if you can stack the odds in your favor, that's a really good surge, and it's almost worth taking a look at just for that reason. Some of these illusions.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we will. likely continue to see illusions throughout this whole season, and it
Mm.
looks like because they have this limited effect that they are willing to make them pretty strong, um, which may turn out to be a mistake. Like these might be better than we're sort of thinking that they maybe initially were. Like we know that upgrades that just say this fighter is on guard have
Yeah.
historically been restricted
Yeah.
because they are very strong. Being able to just pop that out right when you need it and not have to
Mm.
worry about paying glory for it, like that could be a game changer. There is some stuff that is just like there's some crazy stuff. We didn't even talk about it, but there's another one here, false presence.
Mm.
Effectively it's a teleport. If you have a way to break this on demand, so like if you have a choose in your own ploys, when this illusion breaks, you get to take your fighter and place them on a starting hex in your territory.
Mm.
So it's like it's not exactly like Fenway Crystal, but it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a powerful card that got tons of use. So
Yeah.
uh, I don't know. It's worth exploring. We're kind of going down the rabbit hole of like how does this stuff affect championship?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's worth mentioning. Play around with this stuff. Like I don't think that anybody's used them enough yet to have a really strong idea,
Hmm.
and I think it's something that's worth exploring.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd agree. I got that false presence out on somebody. I think I was trying to score because it was Wormspad. A reason that one pro for Wormspad is that there's Masters of Illusion. You can score it after a power step if each surviving friendly fighter has an illusion upgrade. That's a card that benefits a smaller warband.
Yep.
And so I remember putting out that the card you were talking about, false presence, the teleport one, putting it out so that I could get this. And then I ended up in an awkward situation where at the end of the round it broke because it's an illusion, and I was like, oh well, now I got to pick up Septimus and put him back down in my territory, and and I was actually trying to get him into enemy territory, so this is a little awkward,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, that was. But there's a lot, like we said, there's a lot of good stuff in there. Um, for Wormspat too, some of the weapons I feel like they don't benefit as much as Magors did, since Golgotch is already on 3 smash. So
Yeah. I think.
Phantom Fist is just kind of like it's slightly better because he will stagger somebody if he lands it. But Golgotch wouldn't mind getting some darts, and then the spear with cleave is handy there. But they really like Phantom Shield.
Very much.
Pre-Inspire, that's good on all of them. Even post-Inspire, it's excellent on Fecula. Um, just to help you with that damage reduction. It's just good right off the bat. Blood Rack Mask, I mean, Fecula's even wearing it, so in the art. And it
Hmm.
helped you towards that Inspire, which is pretty fun. So good stuff there. The it was fun to oh yeah, like I'm drawing my hand, and uh, often you look at your hand, you're like, okay, well, somehow I've got to unlock half my hand by getting some glory to be able to spend in the first place. And here, like, no, I can use everything in my hand
Yeah.
as is usable. Pretty amazing. Um, I think a key card for this, which even thins it more, is that Illusory Find, which is the
Yeah.
Gambit. Because I found that actually to be pretty useful. I was usually less about digging for a particular. I guess I should define Illusory Find real quick. This is the keep revealing cards off the top of your deck until you get to an illusion. Put that in your hand and then shuffle your deck back up. Um, I didn't find it as often being a thing where I was searching for a specific illusion. Uh, but what I was trying to do is have enough illusions in hand to score Illusory Nemesis, or Masters of Illusion, or just get enough upgrades to do like Illusory Titan. Um, all of which are surges. So uh, that
Yeah.
that Gambit, I don't know. I thought that was pretty good actually. Again,
I
better than I gave it credit for. So.
I definitely agree. When you know you've So here's the fun thing that you could do with this. Like, obviously in this deck there's just a lot of illusions, so you're sort
Mhm.
of like, well, I know I'm going to pull something and I can probably use something out of it because they're all kind of useful, as we've been saying, and there's a lot of things you need illusions for to score, and you need more than one, so it's like, okay, here I can get another one. But it specifically just has you dig until you find an illusion. If you only put one illusion in your deck because you know that it's like, hey, it's sort of that extra piece that helps unlock something for this warband,
Yeah,
you have a way to just go dig and find one specific card. Like, we've never done anything like that in Underworlds before, and that's pretty cool. And there's like no downside.
yeah,
uh Let me just double check. Yeah, no, there's no downside. I mean, you just replace this ploy for that illusion. That's
yeah.
all you're doing.
I think
um
Amon over at Path to Glory would argue that the downside is that you showed all the cards that you have in your deck to your
Yeah,
opponent.
that is certainly a downside. But by the time you got into rounds 2 and 3, assuming
Hmm.
you play 3 rounds, you know, if you know that you're in a situation where you're like, hey, if I just pull out, I don't know, if I just pull out the thing that puts me on guard, and I no
Hmm.
longer can be driven back, and that's going to win me the game. I don't care
Yeah,
if anybody else sees the rest of my deck. I want to win.
sure. My argument is maybe less about showing what cards you have in your deck, but more about giving some information about your hand, right? So if I'm watching you turn
True.
cards over and there is, a critical card like Furious Reprisal or shared shared pain, shared agony, whatever the
Hmm.
one that always destroys me in Dread Pageant. uh, some of those cards really will shape around where you're, and then if you see it go by, like, okay, it's not in there or it's not in their hand right now. That can. I'm not. This is not an argument to say that I think Illusory Find is bad. I think it's decent and then situationally great if you kind of build around it. But again, probably not a card I would have thought was worth including, but having been forced to play it because I was playing Rivals, it really kind of opened my eyes to it. So um,
Agreed.
it's good specifically in this deck, and I think it made us think about the ways that it might be good in Championship. So.
Yeah. So we haven't really talked about a lot of these other gambits, but I think it's worth mentioning a few of them. Um, so a lot of them are pretty basic uh, stuff that you would kind of be like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, I think one that is not good, but is probably worth mentioning because of the mechanics that it's playing with are new to the game, but it's Phantom Retrieval. So
Yeah,
this one lets you pick one or more illusion upgrades in your discard pile, and then you have to discard 2 power cards from your hand for every illusion that you picked from your discard pile, and then you
yeah,
get to return those illusions to your hand. So just right off the bat, the math doesn't really make sense because you're spending 1 card to go get a card that you then have to discard 2 more cards for. So you're spending 3 cards to get one. That's not a
yeah.
good deal.
No,
And if you wanted to get two, then it's 5. You'd have to discard your whole hand to get 2 illusions. Like, that does not make sense to me. I love the concept. I like the
yeah,
idea of having like a card that lets you go get a card back.
yeah,
But I think the price is way too high. Even some of these that are good, it's like, nope, that's never gonna make sense. If you built your deck right, you don't have 2 cards to just throw away.
yeah. So here's I have two thoughts on this. One, I think I'm sure they considered making this like just a straight up go into the graveyard or a discard one, and I think they're worried that it might make their design space too tough with other, like if they made a particularly powerful illusion and then you got to double down on it. So
Yeah,
I think they probably
obviously.
chose the conservative route on this. There's one other card in this deck, Phantom Denial, which also involves a discard. That one is a reaction if somebody has chosen one of your fighters that has an illusion. Then you play that Phantom Denial card and discard a power card from your hand, and then that uh, basically it negates it, just cancels out the choose gambit that the person was using, has no effect. These kind of cards that have the forced or the choose to discard extra cards from your hand uh, feel rough, right? Like, and we
Oh
already
yeah.
talked that Phantom Retrieval is a awfully high cost. However, what I learned playing it in Rivals is that the nature of one of these Universal Rivals decks is that there are going to be cards in there that don't perfectly line up with your warband, right? Like,
Yes.
um, you know, uh, I, we can talk more about like weird corner cases, but this Ephemeral Fortitude, where you get boosted up to wounds 4 in round 1 and 2, and then down to wounds 2 in round 3. Wormspad, not particularly interested in that card. So it ends up being fodder for these. And the thing is that you can't make one of these universal decks that will have it'll either be incredibly boring and everything will have some very, very, basic utility. Like you could have 10 gambits that are all +1 attack dice to your next attack action or something like that. Then sure, yes, that those are all usable by any warband, but it's not very interesting. If you're going to build an interesting deck, there's by the nature of it, there's going to be cards in there that are not useful for some warbands. And when you include things like this, like Phantom Retrieval and Phantom Denial with the discard thing, you basically give those cards utility again. You say, sure, you can't play it, but it can fuel these other things. And I think that's a pretty clever innovation with these. So I, from the perspective of it functioning as a Rivals deck, I think that's a pretty cool idea to have in there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Like, and um, I think there are a lot of decks for the warband specific Rivals setups that would actually kind of like to have stuff like this. There's so
Yeah.
many, like, oh man, this is a really bad card. Like, there's so few ways to actually use this. Having a way to just have it be a a cost that you pay for another good card is
Yeah.
actually pretty nice. And I mean, Phantom Denial, I think actually has a very strong effect.
Yeah.
The thing that holds it back is that it's only if the fighter has an illusion upgrade on it.
Yeah.
Like, if you had a way to just say, hey, anything that chooses my fighter, I can just stop it as long as I am willing to throw away another power card. Like,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think there would be a ton of use for something like that.
Yeah.
But as it is, it's probably too limited because you have to have an illusion on them.
Yeah.
So it works well in this deck, but you probably don't play it in Championship.
Yeah. We had a pretty good moment on this where I
Yeah.
thought I was being super clever. I had it was Vicious Barbs. Hadzu had somehow survived a close encounter with Magor and was like, hey, check this out. Before I run away, I'm going to uninspire this dude, break his illusion, and get out of dodge. And I was already like planning, step 2, 3, and 4 of that. And you're like, actually, I'm going to Phantom Denial that. I'm like, oh my God.
Shut down. And like, that one in particular was such a huge thing to be able to turn off because uninspiring Magor meant that I didn't have anybody with 3 damage anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was like, nope, we're gonna keep Magor in here to chop everybody as best he
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of horrifying. So, um, well, there was another interaction that we kind of happened across. It was a bigger deal in the decks with bigger fighters like Wormspat um, and Magors, and didn't really come up when I was trying it with Despoilers. But Siphon Vigor was a little bit better than you would have thought, specifically because how it interacts with this deck. And then, in theory, if you were to go illusion heavy in another format, then there's this as well.
The main thing here, I guess, is that so Siphon Vigor says that you use a gambit, you choose a friendly fighter, and heal the fighter according to the number of upgrades that fighter had when you played the card as shown below.
Hmm.
Then you break each of their upgrades. So
Hmm.
obviously, if you play this on a fighter with illusions, you're going to break all their illusions. Even just from choosing them, they would all have broken anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But since they're all going to break at the end of the round, no matter what,
Yeah.
you can kind of wait until the end of the round, last power step. You're like, okay, I've got a fighter who's wounded in any amount, and you can heal them up something as
Yep.
long as they have an illusion. So you're like,
Yeah.
well, and rather than just throw these away, let's get some use out of them, heal a little bit.
I think we both ended up only using it for a heal one, but in both cases, it was a fighter who was one. And in Rivals, one health is a pretty big deal. It was, it was taking people out of one shot kill range. So,
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
since damage can be tough to come by. So, uh, it is a card if you look at and you forget that illusions exist, you're like, this is one of the worst cards I've, like, why would I want to break that many? Like,
Yeah,
how desperate would I have to be? But again, in this deck, it works pretty well. And I think if you were going illusion heavy, then it would too. Um, there is one card that it didn't matter what faction we were running, was just not at all good, was Shady Bargain.
yeah,
It's such a weird inclusion. I like it as a card, honestly. But in this deck, here's it says give one upgrade to one friendly fighter without spending glory. Then pick one opponent. That opponent can give one upgrade to any one of their fighters without spending any glory points. The art is awesome on this. It's Crook Grin and Drizkit, I think,
yep,
doing some back alley deals here. Uh, but in this deck specifically, it's you will not be at a shortage for glory. Like you only have 3 cards in your deck that you could even use this on, because the other 7 upgrades you have don't need any glory to put out. And so this feels like the upside is just way too big for the opponent you know for what you
yeah,
get.
yeah,
But um, so it was
absolutely.
just a strange one to include in this deck. But
Yeah, I mean, it's like obviously there have to be things in here to just get cards out into the ecosystem,
yeah,
but this is such a strange choice that like it's never gonna make sense um,
in this
in
rivals format,
rivals.
yeah,
Like, uh, but that being said, for championship, I think this card has some uses. One that we had sort of pondered about is like if you run this in black powder, are you putting your opponent in a really tough position
yeah.
because you want to be able to break their upgrades. So I know it felt like in some of the games we were playing where like you just weren't playing upgrades necessarily or not right away.
Well, yeah.
Um,
Also, specifically because some of what we were playing, you were playing into Illusory Might. So,
well, I mean that definitely hurt too. That
yeah,
definitely hurt.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, so there's definitely some use for this card. Free upgrades are never bad. I think you do have to really consider whether your upgrades are going to be worth giving your opponent an upgrade.
mm,
I guess you could also play this when your opponent has no cards in hand.
yeah,
And then you're like, well, cool, I get a free thing, and you can't. But either way, sort of the odd duck in this power deck.
yeah,
Um,
um, yeah. There was one interaction that I did not get to pull off, but wanted to, or I guess I should say, in retrospect, I wished I'd tried to set it up. And that's transfer of power. I don't think this is a particularly powerful card, uh,
no,
but in a deck that has a lot of illusions, there's the chance that it could be. And this is choose 2 friendly fighters who each have 1 or more illusion upgrades, and um,
no charge tokens.
no charge tokens. So they could have a move, but just no charge. And then place each fighter in a hex that is occupied by the other. Specifically with the spoilers, I thought it'd be pretty cool to get Korsh to drop in at the end of round 1, and then in round 2 do a swaparoo, and get your heavy hitter, get Draknar dropped in and start rampaging around in the back. That felt like a way to get some kind of surprise in there. But it's a really long range potential teleport. Pretty
Yep,
exciting.
anywhere on the board, which is nice.
Yeah,
The the setup though is awfully tough.
yeah,
Both of them have to have illusions, which I mean 2 illusions out of 7. That's pretty significant. And then since you're choosing those fighters, those illusions are going to break.
Oh, I didn't even.
Um, so you're also getting rid of your illusions to do this,
Yeah.
which
Oh
is
man,
also pretty rough.
you broke my
Um,
dream.
I'm sorry to rain on your parade here a little bit, but it's potentially powerful if you have a good reason for needing, like, I think so. If you did this with like Hrothgorn and a Noblar or something, it would feel awful for your opponent,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh no, all of a sudden Hrothgorn's just in the middle of all my stuff. But um, yeah, I mean, it feels like a tough setup. I think
Mm,
so. The only other card that I think we've ever seen that does something like this is an Eyes of the Nine, and that one has a range restriction, but it's just pick 2 fighters and swap their places. And
yeah.
I've had a hard time even using that card. Um, it always sounds good on paper, and then in reality, you're like, well, wait a minute, what am I actually swapping here? Like, the setup is tough. So
Yeah.
yeah, it would have been fun to pull off. I don't know. I don't know that it would have uh,
Uh,
been as good as we'd have liked.
yeah. I would have done it, and then you're like, okay, well now break your illusions, and I'd be like, what?
No, my plans. Um, yeah.
Which actually, that was another point. Is it was a little hard to remember to um, break illusions when a fighter was chosen. I think we had to come up with like where I just forget that I was gonna either break my own or break yours if I, especially if the choose thing that I was doing, like I think I did Lure of Slanesh on somebody, and I wasn't even thinking like, oh, I want to break this guy's illusion. I was
Hmm.
like, I needed to be standing somewhere else. Um, didn't impact the game, but we forgot to break it until the end of the round. It's like, oh, right, weird.
Yeah.
So, um, but to that effect, we were hypothesizing about some of the deck changes that could happen. I wonder if you see enemy choose things um, pick up in frequency. So
Yeah. Maybe. I
yeah,
think right now, anyway, you won't see it unless people are already running them just coincidentally. Um, but maybe. I would
hmm.
even have to just go and look right now. I don't even know. I don't pay that close attention to it.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, it targets enemy fighters, whatever. But some of them
yeah,
just say, like, push an enemy fighter. And
yeah.
others say, like, choose an enemy fighter and then do something with them, which sort of an interesting convention to have. Choose be its own separate keyworded thing.
Hmm. I'll tell you who has a lot of choose. Apparently, is Dread Pageant. I felt like every card I drew
Yeah.
was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I could choose. So that was besides just being a powerful rivals deck in general, because there were so many choose options for them. It's like, okay, well, this is a little rough.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, and I suppose that kind of leads us into the question of like, A, where do we see, now that we've played with this deck a bit, where do we see it fitting into a rivals meta, if we can sort of say that there is a rivals meta? I don't know how much it's being run in that sense.
hmm.
And were there any other decks that you thought, or any other warbands now that you've played with the deck that you feel like should have probably been a better pick, or maybe an interesting one that we didn't try?
Well, I'll go with the first part of that rivals meta. I think it's solid specifically because like we said, it felt like things were generally scoreable. Even we didn't really talk about it, but their third end phase one,
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
big ask, but it's also not impossible. Like
Yeah.
I think the big score in the Silent Menace was you have to have 4 fighters with charge tokens, and
Yeah.
none have to. Is it? I don't know. Like they
Something
can't be
ridiculous.
dead or damaged. Or it was like, whoa, that is basically impossible. Like you'd have to be the luckiest person in the world. And uh, the the one here for this was
Descending Tide.
Descending Tides, uh, and that is you have to have 2 or more surviving friendly fighters, and each of them has to be holding an objective in enemy territory. Again, like a pretty big ask, but not impossible. And
Yeah.
especially with these kind of aggro with Wormspad who are tough, or with Magors who are actually pretty decent at staying where they want to be, thanks to Zarkus and Gartok. Um, that felt like a thing that could have happened, and 3 Glory would have blown one of these games wide apart. It would have
Yeah. Yeah. I
changed the
mean,
results
being
in
able
these.
to pick that up would have definitely meant that the game is being swung. Like,
Yeah.
no question.
Anyway, which is all to say that this is an example of, like, I think all of a sudden Magors can do something in rival. Like, you can bring Magors to a rivals format thing because they can work with this.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's good enough that there's other. I think Wormspat, it didn't blow me away with them, but it also felt like workable. Um, so I think it's good enough to have fun with in rivals, and I don't think it's going to unseat, like, whatever Hrothgorn with all his insanity, and some
Yeah.
of the turbo mode rivals, crushes, Rippas, the really good rivals decks probably aren't too worried about somebody bringing this, but I think this has you solidly in the mix, and it's fun because it holds together well enough to let you bring some of those season 1 and season 2 warbands in a way that the Silent Menace probably doesn't.
Yeah, for sure. That was definitely my feeling as well. It was like, hey, we can actually play rivals now with any warband. Like, not that
Yeah.
you necessarily need to be able to do that, because the availability of a lot of those old warbands has gotten to the point where, like, cool, if you've got them, like, it's fun, but there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people who don't and can't find them. Like, even just the models are hard to come by sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, like, it's not like it's a necessary thing to be able to pull all of them back into rivals, but I think it's cool that it is an option.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's certainly better than the other rivals standalone deck, the Silent
Silent
Menace.
Menace. Sure.
Silent Menace was, I'd say the ploys and stuff are good. The objective deck just didn't make any sense at all. Um,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, what killed that one for rivals. It's just like, how are you supposed to do this stuff? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. All those strikes, the ones that had
yeah,
to happen on, like, the first
first
activation.
activation
Yeah.
of the round, killed with a range 3 attack. It's like, what are you expecting me to be doing with this exactly?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we feel like it fits in fairly well in the meta. We still don't feel like it's top tier. The big 3 destruction warbands are still holding serve there.
Yeah.
But it's at least middle of the pack and lets you play stuff. Now that you have played with this deck and played against this deck, do you think there are any other warbands that you would want to try it with, or think that it would be better on than the ones we have already done?
I don't know about better. I mean, you made the suggestion of Spike Claw's Swarm. I'd
I
like to at least
did.
see it.
Yeah.
It has, so interestingly, this is not something we mentioned, but I mentioned in passing the couple of good pushes. There's Cover of Darkness, which is pick 1, Gamuts cannot deal damage, persist
Hmm.
until the end of the next power step, or push 1 friendly fighter up to 2 hexes into a cover hex. And then the other one is Phantom Advance, which is push each friendly fighter with 1 or more illusion upgrades up to 1 hex towards the nearest friendly fighter. Neither of those say choose, so you're not choosing a friendly. So those work well together with this deck in that you can get those push and you don't break your own illusions by doing so.
Yeah.
If you have them up with Spike Claw, it's a little weird because you do want to be able to choose friendly fighters,
Yeah.
so that you can inspire them. But it puts a weird thing of, like, okay, I'm going to put an illusion on my guy. Now, opponent, you can choose to break my illusion, but then I will inspire for it. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of the guys in the warband maybe don't really care if they inspire too much. I mean, from the opponent's perspective, like, fine, Festering Skaven can have an extra dice on his attack, whatever. But it does make him harder to kill down the line. And Scritch definitely gets a lot out of it. So
Yes.
that's that's an interesting. I would like just to see how that interaction goes. Putting people in like a lose lose, like
Mm-hmm.
break my upgrade and inspire me, or leave me with my upgrade. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it does allow for the like mini missiles, right? You take
yeah,
Lurking, Festering, and Hungering, throw one of the weapons on them, and just throw them in. And it's like,
yeah,
yeah, okay, whatever. Lurking Skaven, you now have, 3 smash, 2 damage on 2 dodge.
hmm,
And it's not bad.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, and it'd be interesting. I think my whole thing when I was originally looking at them was like, oh yeah, there's all this stuff about being in enemy territory and holding stuff in enemy territory, and then as long as you can keep Scripture alive, you should guarantee that you can have fighters in enemy territory.
yeah,
Um, Problem is, you might be giving up 1 glory for every fighter you want to put in enemy territory, which could definitely lose you the game.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just kind of rough.
Sure. Did you? I guess the other one I didn't think real hard about this, but I kind of was wondering if Thorns of the Briar Queen might have something here. Is again little guys that wouldn't mind the upgrades. They
Yeah.
have somebody who would benefit from. I mean, they have plenty of guys who benefit from getting buffed with the ephemeral fortitude. And they like being on guard, so that illusory form is handy for them. So
I don't know. I actually hadn't considered these guys much, but yeah, you got plenty of ways of getting around the board, and
yeah,
I think so. This is a interesting, just general rivals meta question, but like, I think the more fighters you have, the more at risk you are,
yeah,
right? Because we found the glory differentials were tiny,
yeah,
and
yeah.
having
That's a good point.
4 2-wound fighters that are on 1 dodge feels really rough. Like say you're playing Thorns and you roll into Magors playing Illusions, like it almost feels like a field day for Magors.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
yeah,
that you can't run big fighter warbands in in rivals, but it feels like you're gonna need to not be hemorrhaging glory.
right. You can't make up for the glory you lose as easily as you could if you got to really fine tune your objective deck. So,
Yeah.
was there a faction that you were interested in?
So some of the ones that I thought about, I have since thought better of because they would probably have better just rivals decks for themselves in general. So it's like, no, don't run Crushes with this. They should just run their deck.
Yeah.
But something like Stormsire's probably not terrible. Again, survivable, have a nice range of weapons. I think they suffer from not benefiting from the weapons as much.
Yeah.
And then the only other one that I'd given any thought to is the Wild Hunt.
Mm.
Um, I think Elthian and Shiok pre-inspire both can benefit from. So they're extra reach for Shiok, extra accuracy and damage for Elthian. Both
Oh, interesting.
feel
Yeah.
pretty good.
They get on their charge counter and they get to inspire.
Yeah, but
Huh.
they're also a little bit fragile. Um, so I do worry about that a little bit, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's terrible. Like you could probably make it work. You'd be like turbo aggro though. You really need to get the kills. You're not just gonna survive by
Yeah.
walking into enemy territory and not killing your opponent.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, all right. Well, what else do we have to say about illusory might or illusions in general?
I just think the only thing that I've come away with, and we've mentioned this already, is that it feels like illusions are a mechanic that needs to be explored some more. I don't think I've seen too many people talking about using them, and feels like they could actually be pretty solid in the right warbands. I don't know how many you use or exactly how you build it, but they feel pretty good to me.
Mm.
So I think it's something worth exploring. And
I think so, and I think part of that though is that there just haven't been very many good universal illusions for up until
that's
now.
true. I guess if we just take a quick outside of Illusory Nemesis, there are four. I think I'm counting four, and one of those is chaos specific. So yeah, I guess fair point. I don't think that we've had enough yet to really be able to do anything with them.
Yeah, but I think as we've said many times, this of the 7 in here, there's something for just about anybody. There's some pretty good stuff in here. Um, better than I thought at first. So
Definitely.
I really want to see somebody do some cool stuff with false presence. That feels like uh, some really cool moments could get pulled off with that thing. So
Yes, I think that you could definitely pull some interesting sort of yo-yo tricks there.
yeah, now I'm just like spending time looking at the other illusions out
What are
there.
all
So
these? What's all of this? Yeah, and I think it's worth keeping an eye as well on um, this Warlords or Rivals Plus format.
mm,
Um, so the tournament that Compact wrote about was actually run at Warhammer World. So um, obviously they are supporting it. You know, GW is,
yep,
and I think it has some potential to be an interesting. I mean, like Rivals is interesting, but I think Rivals naturally filters the field pretty heavily.
hmm
We've mentioned already that like Hrothgorn is super turbo mode uh, in Rivals. I think he's got what 8 surges.
mm,
Like
yeah,
it's just some silly
something crazy.
stuff where it was like I don't know what they were necessarily planning here. Um, and then he's just got some really powerful cards in general. So, uh, but I think that extra bit of being able to sort of filter some of the bad stuff out of your Rivals deck could mean that that Warlord format does feel pretty solid.
Yeah, totally.
So something to keep an eye on for sure.
Mhm. Well, all right. I really like the experiment of trying this deck. I think our original plan was to run Illusory Might versus Silent Menace on something, and then we decided that we'll just make it be played into rivals matchups. That might be
Yeah.
not a great test. So, but it was a good learning experience for me, and I really liked playing rivals. Turns out, so I like being forced to use cards that I wouldn't otherwise include, and then just try and crack that puzzle of how do I figure out how to make this good. And there was a learning curve too, where we were both like kind of good natured grumbling, like, "Oh my god, this hand looks so bad." And
What do I
you're like,
do?
you're like, well, I guess the whatever I've got going on, so does the other player. They're
Yeah.
struggling. I just because it looks like I'm only going to get 2 glory this round. That's great if the other guy gets none or 1. So
Yeah, I think we
uh,
had multiple end phases where nobody scored anything. So
yeah,
um,
yeah,
definitely, it's a different mindset, but it felt interesting. It was like, yeah, this is nice. It's not just like this crazy hyper mode where everybody's scoring 20 glory, like to sort of
yeah.
make sure that you actually can get the win.
Little bit of a call out to very early in season 1, where I was
Yeah,
like,
breaking double
"Oh,
digits felt like
did
a
you hear about Phil? He got 12 glory in that game." Like, no way.
whoa.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, any last thoughts, or should we wrap this up?
let's wrap this one up.
Okay, sounds good. If you want to get in touch with us about the podcast, you can reach us on Twitter at WTHcast or whatthehexcast at gmail.com. You can check out all the Mortal Realms Network content. That's the story phase. That's Dogs of Warcry. That's Path to Story. And there's still some cool archive stuff there from Eric. He's got like a comic strip up in there that's pretty entertaining, good stuff. But that's themortalrealms.com where you can go check that out. Coming up, we will be figuring out maybe a little Acon prep. Maybe we'll look at some of the faction cards. And may break down. I just want to say thanks for everybody who took the time to fill out that survey. So I'm going to be parsing the results of that at some point, and um, at the very least, we'll share some of that. Not all it's particularly interesting for the listener perspective, but there were some pretty great answers on favorite cards and favorite fighters. So we'll make sure to pass those around. And just one more thing, we had a little conversation on our end, and I think we're going to make a minor adjustment right now. The podcast is coming out every other Monday, so on a bi-weekly basis on Monday mornings. We are going to adjust that to be a bi-weekly basis on Saturday mornings, with the intent of when things line up well, we can get you that content a little earlier and line up with the new release schedule as embargoes and such clear. So should be pretty invisible to most. But yeah, this episode is out on a Monday, and then the next one after this you can look for. I guess you'll get your episode that much faster for that one time. Your recommended listening is Civil War, and that's off of Use Your Illusion 2 by Guns N' Roses. For What the Heck's, I've been Davy.
And this is Phil.
I was way more jabbery about that than it needed to be. All right.
I should probably have listened a little closer there.
Oh, where am I? I need a new tab.
Draknar.